Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. You
Hmm.
know, where we like to dig into the good stuff, the interesting stuff from all your sources. And today we're going deep on excerpts from Andy Neal's book, The Complete Works of an Incomplete Man.
Ooh,
I know, right?
interesting title.
It's a pretty wild ride through short stories, poems, critiques, editorials. It's all over the place.
Wow.
And it's all from this guy, this self-proclaimed incomplete man, which I feel like that alone says a lot, you know?
It definitely sets the stage for someone who's self-aware,
Hmm.
even maybe a bit mischievous with how he presents himself.
Right, like he's kind of winking at us from the title page already, like
Yeah.
don't take me too seriously kind of a thing. But you know, there's a depth to this incompleteness idea too.
Yeah.
It's not just a funny title. It seems to be like a recurring theme throughout his work, almost like he's on this constant quest for self-discovery, which is interesting because when you look at his career path too, he's been a filmmaker, photographer, model. He was even a Homer modeler for a while. It's like he's constantly trying on all these different hats,
Yes.
searching for the one that fits just right.
That's an interesting connection.
Yeah.
That varied career path could be a manifestation of that incompleteness,
Right.
right? A constant exploration of different facets of himself and the world around him, almost like he's saying, I contain multitudes.
In a sentiment.
Many of us can probably relate to.
Yeah, for sure. And that brings us to Neal's thoughts on writing itself.
Okay.
In one excerpt, he just throws some serious shade at fiction.
Really?
Oh yeah, he basically calls it like PU, like it just stinks.
Wow.
But then he describes his own work as plucky deconstructionalist by way of Dr. Seuss.
Okay.
I mean, what do you even do with that?
Yeah.
It's so interesting. He's rejecting traditional storytelling, but still using his own life as material, just in this very like fragmented, nonlinear way.
It's a fascinating paradox. He's creating his own very unique form of self-expression, I think, and one that really defies easy categorization. It's like he's using writing as a way to piece together his identity,
Yeah.
but not in a neat and tidy way,
Yeah.
like a mosaic
Yeah.
with jagged edges and mismatched pieces.
Yeah. And the reason he gives for writing a book is just priceless. He basically says, I wrote this to avoid having to explain myself to anyone.
Oh, wow.
Like, here's my story, but don't expect me to like hold your hand through it kind of a thing.
I see it as a form of controlled vulnerability.
Yeah.
He's revealing himself through his writing, but very much on his own terms.
Yeah.
It allows him to connect with the reader while still maintaining a certain distance, which, again, could be a way of protecting himself from judgment or scrutiny.
For sure. And speaking of revealing himself, let's dive into Neal's dating life, or maybe I should say dating disasters, because wow, he paints these hilarious portraits of these characters like Mr. Nosehairs, Shecky, and Uncle Fester.
I mean, the names alone,
No.
you're already laughing.
I know you can't make this stuff up, but it's not just about the humor, though, right?
Right.
What do these anecdotes reveal about Neal's views on love and connection, do you think?
Well, the humor definitely acts as a shield, but underneath, you definitely sense a yearning for something more meaningful, right?
Yeah.
It's like he's simultaneously drawn to and repelled by the whole dating scene, especially in a place like Palm Springs, which he describes as this purgatory or perpetual vacation.
I know. He talks about Palm Springs like it's this strange social experiment where everybody's trying to escape something, but nobody ever really does. And this whole sense of searching but never quite finding seems to like permeate a lot of his dating experiences.
Exactly. It's like he's constantly testing the waters of connection, but always with a healthy dose of skepticism and, a quick win at the ready, perhaps, as a defense mechanism against potential disappointment.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this complex, creative guy who's a bit wary of vulnerability and has this hilariously disastrous dating history. So let's add another layer to this portrait, his views on sexuality. Okay.
In his essay, Sign of the Sexual Times, he really throws down the gauntlet. He questions labels like straight, bi, and gay.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's saying they're too simplistic. They don't capture the nuances of human experience.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's almost as if he's challenging the rigidity of labels, right? Suggesting that sexuality is more fluid and less easily categorized.
Yeah.
Perhaps he's trying to encourage a deeper understanding of individual expression and experience rather than just relying on, these preconceived notions.
And he definitely doesn't shy away from controversy.
Yeah.
He even takes a swing at Hugh Hefner and Playboy,
Interesting.
critiquing their portrayal of women and saying it's more about perpetuating this shallow fantasy than celebrating real sexuality.
Yeah. It's important to note the context of Neal's critique here. I think, he might be arguing for a more authentic and multifaceted portrayal of sexuality.
Yeah.
one that goes beyond the airbrushed images and manufactured desires he perceives in mainstream media.
It's almost like he's searching for something more genuine, more real, even in his critiques.
Totally. And that same critical lens is turned on another subculture, the Goths. He goes in on
Yes.
their apathy, their hypocrisy, their lack of a master plan. It's almost like he's saying, if you're going to rebel, do it with purpose. Don't just wear black and mope around.
Yeah, I think there's more to it than just a critique of, goth style or attitude.
Yeah.
He might be using the goth subculture as this microcosm to examine broader societal issues. You know,
Like conformity.
conformity rebellion, the search for identity.
Yeah, like anyone who's ever felt like an outsider searching for a place to belong.
Exactly. And his challenge to become yourself all the time could be interpreted as a call to authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
to live according to your own values
Yeah.
and not the expectations of others.
Okay, so we've covered Neal's, dating misadventures, his thoughts on writing and sexuality, his critiques of Playboy and goth culture. It's quite a ride. But there's one more big topic we need to unpack, his views on religion.
Ooh, big one.
I know, right?
Okay, this is where I think Neal's skepticism really takes center stage. He doesn't just question specific religious beliefs, he tackles the very concept of God,
Wow.
argues that it's a human construct designed to provide comfort in this uncertain world.
Interesting.
And he doesn't hold back on pointing out the hypocrisy he sees in organized religion, how people preach love and acceptance while simultaneously judging and condemning those who don't fit in.
It's a pretty pointed critique. But what's interesting is that he doesn't dismiss the human need for meaning and belonging.
Right.
He acknowledges that religion can provide those things for some people, but he encourages individuals to find their own path to question their beliefs and to ultimately arrive at their own truth.
It's like he's saying, don't just accept what you've been told, think for yourself, figure it out. And that sense of individual agency and personal responsibility, that's something that seems to run through all of his work, wouldn't you say? Absolutely. Whether he's dissecting his own messy love life, critiquing pop culture, or challenging our notions of God and religion, there's this underlying belief in the power of the individual to create their own meaning and to live a life that's true to themselves.
I'm loving this deep dive. We've explored a lot of ground already, from dating disasters to critiques of society and even religion, but there's so much more to uncover about this incomplete man and his complete works.
What's fascinating to me is that even though we've only just begun to explore his work, a pattern is emerging.
Yeah.
We can see how his personal experiences, like his, rocky relationship history, directly influence his critiques of social norms and cultural phenomena. It's almost like he's using his life as a lens through which to examine the world around him.
That's such a good point.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
he's inviting us to join him on this journey of self-discovery, to see the world through his unique and often hilarious perspective. We'll be right back to continue our deep dive into the mind of Andy Neal.
One thing that strikes me about Neal is how he uses humor as this defense mechanism, especially when he's talking about kind of sensitive topics like relationships and sexuality. He can be incredibly witty, finding the absurd in these everyday situations. But there's always this underlying vulnerability that kind of peeks through.
Yeah, it's like he's inviting us to laugh with him, but not necessarily at him.
Right.
And it makes you want to dig deeper, to figure out what's behind that carefully constructed facade.
Right. There's this certain push and pull dynamic to his writing that just keeps you hooked. Speaking of pushing and pulling, there's one anecdote that really stood out to me.
Yeah.
It's the one about his encounter with Hogg.
Oh, huh.
His character he describes as a cokehead fresh from Betty Ford,
I love it.
with a different getup for every sexual act.
Oh, yes, Hogg, the one with the fuck for Jesus tattoo.
Oh my gosh.
Talk about a walking contradiction.
It's
Yeah.
a shocking image for sure. But I think Neal is using this over-the-top encounter to explore the disconnect between fantasy and reality
Yeah.
and modern sexuality.
Yeah.
I remember how he jokes about today's kinky becoming tomorrow's boring, old-school vanilla sex.
Right.
It's almost like he's suggesting that even our most extreme desires eventually become normalized.
Yeah, he's definitely seen it all, or at least that's the persona he projects. But I wonder if beneath that jaded exterior, there's still a part of him that longs for genuine connection, for something more than just these fleeting encounters.
It's a valid question. After all, he dedicates a significant portion of the book to his long-term relationship with Trevor.
Right.
And the way he describes their dynamic, it's clear that there were all these unresolved issues simmering beneath the surface for years.
And then Juan enters the picture, this young, enigmatic figure who completely disrupts their world.
Juan is a fascinating character.
Yeah.
Neal portrays him as this master of deception, someone who's very skilled at manipulating others to get what he wants.
Yeah, he comes across as almost predatory,
Yeah.
preying on the vulnerabilities of both Trevor and Neal.
It's a classic love triangle scenario,
Mm.
fraught with drama and tension. And the way Neal describes the aftermath, the pain and the sense of betrayal, it's clear that this experience left a lasting impact.
Absolutely. But what I find interesting is that Neal doesn't shy away from acknowledging his own role in the situation, you know?
Right.
He admits to feeling lonely, to seeking something to fill a void, and to making mistakes along the way.
That self-awareness is refreshing.
Oh.
It would be easy to portray himself as the victim,
Oh, totally.
but instead he takes ownership of his choices and actions.
Exactly. And that ties back to the idea of incompleteness that we talked about earlier. He's not presenting himself as this finished product, but as someone who's constantly evolving, learning from his mistakes, and striving for something more.
That willingness to be vulnerable and to admit his flaws is what makes him so relatable, I think.
Really?
He's not afraid to show us his messy, imperfect self, which makes us feel less alone in our own struggles.
Speaking of messy and imperfect, one excerpt that I think really highlights Neal's unique voice and perspective is his film review of Shadow of the Vampire.
Ah, yes, his film reviews.
Yeah.
This is where his love of cinema and his sharp wit really shine.
Oh, yeah.
In the Shadow of the Vampire review, he dives deep into these themes of artistic obsession, the blurring of reality and fantasy, and this complex relationship between the creator and creation.
And of course, he can't resist taking a few jabs at Hollywood along the way.
Of course not. But beyond the humor, I think he's also using this film review to explore some of his own anxieties about the creative process.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, remember how he talks about the director's obsession with achieving authenticity in the film, even if it means sacrificing the well-being of those around him?
Yes, and how he draws these parallels between the director's single-minded pursuit of his vision and the vampire's insatiable thirst for blood.
Exactly.
It's like he's suggesting that there's this dark side to creativity, a potential for obsession and self-destruction.
Exactly. And I think that resonates with Neal on a personal level. As a writer and artist himself,
Yeah.
he must grapple with those same impulses, the drive to create something meaningful, but also the potential for it to consume you.
That's a really interesting perspective. It adds another layer of depth to his critique of the film.
Right. It's not just a surface-level review. It's a reflection on the nature of art itself, and perhaps even a commentary on his own artistic struggles.
It seems like every piece of writing we delve into reveals another facet of this complex and intriguing individual. But as much as he embraces introspection, Neal doesn't shy away from tackling social and cultural issues. Head-on, take, for instance, his critique of Brokeback Mountain.
Ah, yes. Brokeback Mountain, a film that was widely praised for its, groundbreaking portrayal of love and sexuality, but one that Neal found deeply problematic.
He doesn't hold back, does he?
No, he doesn't. He argues that the film perpetuates harmful stereotypes about gay men, that it romanticizes this toxic relationship, and ultimately reinforces the idea that love between two men is doomed to tragedy.
It's a controversial stance for sure, but I think it's important to remember that Neal is speaking from his own experiences and observations.
Yeah.
His critique might stem from a desire for more nuanced and authentic representations of gay loved ones that challenge the dominant narratives often presented in mainstream media.
It's interesting how his own experiences with heartbreak and betrayal in the whole Juan and Trevor situation might be informing his reading of the film.
Totally. Like he's saying, I've felt this pain, and I don't want to see it romanticized or trivialized.
Exactly. He's challenging us to look beyond the surface and to engage with the complexities of love loss and sexuality in all their messy real-life forms.
It's definitely a thought-provoking critique, one that challenges us to think critically about how love and sexuality are portrayed in the media.
And that critical thinking is something that Neal encourages throughout his work.
Yeah.
Whether he's dissecting his own dating disasters, reviewing films, or critiquing social norms, he's constantly pushing us to question our assumptions and to look at the world from different perspectives.
He's like that friend who always asks the tough questions, the one who makes you think about things in a whole new way.
Exactly. He's not afraid to be provocative, to challenge the status quo, and to make us a little uncomfortable at times. And that's what makes him such an engaging and insightful writer.
So we've explored Neal's relationships, his film critiques, and his social commentary. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, each revelation more fascinating than the last.
And just when you think you've got him figured out, he throws you a curveball.
Eh.
We'll be back in a moment to unpack one of his most thought-provoking and controversial topics, his views on religion.
All right, so we've gone pretty deep into Andy Neal's world now,
Yeah.
his dating life, his take on art and society, and even his own personal struggles. But there's this one more area where he really pushes the envelope religion.
Yeah, this is where Neil's independent thinking really takes center stage, I think.
Yeah.
He doesn't just question specific religious beliefs. He tackles the very idea of God,
Right.
suggesting it's a human creation that we cling to for comfort, you know,
Yeah.
in a world that often feels chaotic and meaningless.
And he's not afraid to call out what he sees as hypocrisy. How some people preach love and acceptance while judging and
Yeah.
condemning those who don't conform to their beliefs.
You can really feel his frustration there. But what's interesting is that he doesn't completely dismiss the human need for meaning and belonging. You know,
Right.
he recognizes that religion can provide those things for some, but he encourages each of us to find our own path to question, to explore, and ultimately to find our own truth.
It's like he's saying, don't just accept what you've been told, go on the journey yourself. And that emphasis on personal agency, on taking responsibility for your own beliefs and values, that's a thread that runs through all his work, isn't it?
Absolutely. Whether he's dissecting his own relationship mishaps, critiquing films, or challenging our ideas about God, there's this underlying message. You have the power to create your own meaning, to live authentically.
It's inspiring in a way. He's not giving us easy answers,
Right.
but he's encouraging us to ask the tough questions and find our own way.
And I think one of the most powerful takeaways from this deep dive, something Neil really embodies in his work, is that embracing our incompleteness can actually be a source of strength.
Mm.
It keeps us open to new experiences, allows for growth, and lets us find beauty in the imperfections of life.
Embracing our incompleteness. I love that. It's like
Yeah.
he's giving us permission to not have everything figured out, to
Right.
be on this constant journey of self-discovery.
Exactly. And by being honest about his own struggles, his own incompleteness, he makes us, the readers, feel less alone in ours.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the complete works of an incomplete man, what's the one thing you hope our listener walks away with?
You know, if Neil sees himself as incomplete, what does that mean for us? Are we all works in progress? And if so, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's in those gaps and the not knowing that we find the potential for growth, connection, and creating a life that's truly our own.
What a journey this has been. We've laughed, we've cringed, we've been challenged to think differently, Andy Neal. You've definitely left us with a lot to ponder. And to our listener, thanks for diving deep with us today.